Chapter 1. The Silent Rancher. The prairie stretched endless and quiet beneath a burning orange sky, the last rays of sun bleeding over the horizon. Harlan Cole leaned against the weather post of his corral, hat tipped low to shade his eyes. The ranch was still, just the creak of an old windmill turning slow in the evening breeze, and the shuffle of horses settling in for the night. For years, silence had been his companion, heavy as the dust that clung to his boots. He hadn't spoken more than a handful of words to anyone in town since his wife was buried on the hill behind the cottonwoods. Words had died with her, or so it felt. Now he lived by the rhythm of chores, whiskey, and the emptiness of his big, hollow house. That night, the silence broke. 3 figures appeared on the ridge, silhouettes against the dying light. At first he thought coyotes prowled too close, but as they drew near, the wind carried the sound of moccasins scuffing the dirt and the soft jangle of beads. 3 women, Apache. Their hair was black as raven's wing, their faces drawn with hunger and dust. They stopped at his gate, unsure of the rancher with the hard jaw, and rifle leaning against the fence would run them off. The eldest, tall, proud despite her exhaustion, stepped forward. Her voice was steady, though her eyes betrayed the weight of desperation. "Please," she said in broken English, "we need shelter, just for a while." Harlan said nothing. He straightened, eyes narrowing beneath his brim. His hand hovered near the rifle but never touched it. He studied them. The second woman clutching a torn blanket around her shoulders, the youngest barely more than a girl, trembling from cold and fear. The prairie wind tugged at his coat, carrying with it the distant call of coyotes, sharp and lonely. For a long moment, Harlan let the silence hang, as if weighing the request against the years he had built his solitude. The younger one whispered, her voice breaking, "We have nowhere else." Harlan's throat tightened. Something inside him, long buried, stirred, and echoed the man he once was. His jaw worked, rough from disuse, before words finally scraped out. "You can stay," he muttered, voice gravelly, like rocks shifting in a dry creek bed. "But only for tonight." The women exchanged glances, relief flashing in their dark eyes. They stepped past the gate cautiously, as if unsure whether the invitation might vanish as quick as it came. Harlan turned without another word, boots crunching on the dry earth as he led them toward the house. The lantern light spilled from the doorway, warm against the dusk. Behind him, the women followed, their footsteps soft but steady, bringing with them the faint scent of sagebrush and survival. And for the first time in years, the silent rancher felt his loneliness shift, fragile as the first star rising in the wide, empty sky. Chapter 2. 3 Shadows of the Desert. Morning broke, with a pale gold light crawling over the prairie. The ranch stirred awake to the low whicker of horses and the creak of barn doors. Harlan Cole stepped out onto his porch, hat already shadowing his tired eyes, and found the 3 women where he'd left them, sleeping near the dying embers of the hearth. They looked smaller in the daylight. Dust clung to their skirts, hair tangled from wind and travel. The eldest stirred first. She rose with quiet dignity, straight-backed even as exhaustion weighed on her. "We will work," she said, her voice clear now, no longer the trembling plea of last night. "Not beggars." Harlan's mouth tightened. He gave no reply, only tipped his head toward the corral. The horses needed feed. The fences leaned tired. Work was plenty, if they meant what they said. The second sister, Tala, she called herself, followed him into the yard. She moved with a quiet grace, gathering hay with her bare hands and tossing it to the restless geldings. Harlan watched from a corner of his eye, expecting clumsy hands, but her movements were steady, practiced, almost tender. The animals settled under her touch. By noon, the youngest, Sonny, was laughing as she carried water, the sound so out of place it startled Harlan. He hadn't heard laughter in his yard in years, not since before the grave behind the cottonwoods. He froze mid-step, the bucket in his hand sloshing over. Something in that laughter pressed against the cracks in his silence. He turned sharply and walked away, hiding in the barn shadows. Inside, he busied himself with tack, though his thoughts wrestled against the sight of them filling his ranch with life. He had taken them, and out of duty he barely understood. Maybe pity, maybe guilt, but watching them now unsettled something deeper. By evening, the smell of venison stew drifted through the house. Tala stirred the pot, the youngest humming under her breath. The eldest, Naya, stood near the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on him. "You watch us," she said plainly, not accusing, just stating truth. Harlan's jaw tightened. He set down his spoon with a clatter. "I watch everything on my land." Naya stepped closer, her gaze steady, almost challenging. "We are not thieves, not burdens. If you keep us, you must see us as more than shadows." The fire cracked between them, shadows dancing across the cabin walls. Harlan said nothing, but in the silence, his rough hand clenched into a fist, betraying the storm brewing in his chest. Outside, a coyote called, lonely and sharp. Inside, for the first time in years, the ranch held voices, and the stirrings of a change he could not yet name. Chapter 3, Whiskey, Whispers, and Warnings. The saloon was alive with the kind of noise Harlan Cole had learned to avoid. Piano keys jangling off rhythm, cards slapped on sticky tables, laughter that carried the bite of mockery, and spurs dragging across the warped floorboards. He pushed through the swinging doors anyway, hat low, boots heavy with trailed dust. He needed salt, flour, maybe whiskey enough to dull the ghosts. The bartender, a burly man with a scar down his cheek, nodded but said nothing. Harlan grunted in return and took a seat near the back, where the shadows pooled. He had barely lifted the glass to his lips before the whisper started. "That's Cole, ain't it?" One ranch hand muttered. "Old fool's gone soft." Another said, voice loud enough to carry. Took in 3 squaws out of his place. The men around the table chuckled. The sound sharp as broken glass. A woman in red silk leaned against the bar, smirking as she fanned herself, her eyes glinting toward Harlan like he was some sorry curiosity. Harlan's shoulders tensed. He kept his gaze on the whiskey, but the words pricked at him. One drunk, already 3 shots past sense, staggered near his table. "Ain't right, Cole," he slurred, jabbing a finger. "Apache women don't belong on a white man's land. Folks won't stand for it." The saloon quieted in that way it did when everyone waited for violence. Chairs scraped, boots shifted. Even the piano stilled. Harlan's jaw flexed. Slowly he rose, his height casting a long shadow across the man. He didn't reach for the Colt at his hip. Instead, his voice came low, gravelly, like a wagon wheel grinding stone. "They asked for shelter. I gave it." He stepped closer, close enough the drunk could smell the dust and sweat a man who lived hard. "You got a problem with that?" The man faltered, his courage spilling like whiskey on the floor. He muttered something foul under his breath and stumbled back toward the bar. From the corner, a deputy leaned on the doorframe, badge glinting in lamplight. "You're stirring a pot that don't need stirring, Cole," he said flatly. "Folks out here don't take kindly to Apache strays. Best send 'em on their way." Harlan stared at him a long moment, then tossed back the last of his whiskey. He set the glass down hard enough to crack the rim, but his voice stayed calm. "They're staying." When he left, the night air outside was cooler, but it carried no peace. As he rode back under a silver slice of moon, he saw a lantern light glowing warm in his house windows. The women's voices rose faintly on the wind, soft, steady, alive. And in the distance, a gunshot split the quiet prairie night. Chapter 4, Firelight and Confessions. The knock of hooves came first. Fast, angry, cutting to the twilight hush. Harlan Cole was fixing the corral gate when dust rose at the far edge of his land. Four riders, silhouettes against the dying sun, spurred hard toward the ranch. He knew their kind, restless men with whiskey in their bellies and hate in their hearts. The sisters were by the house, the youngest, Sonny, fetching water. She froze at the sight. Tala pulled her back, eyes wide with fear, but Naya stood straighter, chin lifted. The riders pulled up, horses snorting, dust swirling around them. One, a lean cowhand with a mean grin, spat in the dirt. "You hidin' savages out here, Cole?" His hand hovered over the revolver at his hip. "Town says you're keeping company that don't belong." Harlan's shoulders squared. He walked forward, each step deliberate, boots grinding in the grit. "Ain't your business who I feed." The man's grin widened. "We'll make it our business." He nudged his horse a step closer, the animal's breath hot in the cooling air. Harlan's hand went to his Colt. Not fast, just steady, the way a man moved when he meant to finish what he started. The riders tensed, but Harlan's voice cut sharp through the gathering dark. "You take one more step on my land, you won't take another anywhere." The words carried weight, heavier than bullets. For a moment, even the horses seemed to listen. Finally, the cowhand laughed low, mean, and turned his horse. "This ain't over, Cole. You'll regret this." They rode off in a storm of dust and curses, their threat hanging in the air long after their shadows disappeared. When the silence returned, Harlan found Naya watching him. Firelight from the lantern by the porch caught in her eyes, fierce and unyielding. Later, when the sisters settled inside, she lingered by the flames outside, waiting. Harlan joined her, lowering himself onto the porch step. The night smelled of smoke and sagebrush, the stars sharp above. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, his voice came rough, as if pulled from deep inside. "Ain't been a man worth following in years. Lost my wife, lost my words. Just lived with ghosts." His hands trembled slightly as he pulled off his hat. "But when I saw those men riding in, I felt something I thought was gone. Felt alive." Naya's gaze softened, the firelight dancing in her eyes. "You are not alone, Harlan Cole. Not anymore." He turned to her then, the wall of silence he'd built for years cracking open. Their eyes held, hers steady, his searching, and for the first time in a long while, he let the truth breathe between them. The flames popped, coyotes howled in the distance, and something unspoken but powerful passed between man and woman, forged in firelight and danger. Would you like me to expand Chapter 5, Blood on the Dust, next, where the real gunfight hits the ranch and the bond between Harlan and the sisters is tested in the fiercest way? Chapter 5, Blood on the Dust. The morning was too still. Even the horses sensed it, ears flicking, muscles tight, hooves shifting uneasily in the dust. Harlan Cole stood on the porch, shotgun resting in the crook of his arm. The sky was streaked with red, as if warning what was to come. The sound arrived next, hoofbeats, not the aimless wander of a rider heading to town, but the hard thunder of men coming for war. Dust rose on the horizon, 10, maybe 12 riders pushing fast toward his ranch. Inside, the sisters were already moving. Naya loaded the rifle with steady hands, her face carved from stone. Tala tied her hair back, bow strung and arrows lined. Young Sonny trembled, but carried buckets of water to the door, her jaw set with more courage than her years. "They won't stop," Naya said flatly, meeting Harlan's eyes. "You know this." Harlan nodded once. His chest tightened, not with fear, but with the cold certainty of a man who'd already buried too much. "Then we hold him here." The riders came yelling, guns flashing in the early light. Bullets sparked off the corral posts, with splintering. Harlan fired first, his shotgun booming, knocking a man clean from his saddle. Naya's rifle cracked next, her shot dropping another before he cleared the fence. Tala's arrow flew silent, quick, catching a rider in the shoulder and sending him howling to the dirt. The yard filled with smoke and chaos. Horses screamed and cursed, and the air reeked of powder. Sonny darted between them, dragging water to douse the flames, licking the porch where a lantern had shattered. Harlan reloaded fast, firing again, his jaw tight, hat brim low. One bullet tore his sleeve, burning his arm, but he didn't falter. Every shot he fired carried years of silence, anger, and the fierce need to protect what little life had bloomed again on his land. Through the haze, he saw the lean cowhand from before, the one with the cruel grin. Their eyes locked across the chaos. The man drew, fast and sure. Harlan's Colt was already up. Both fired. Smoke cleared. The cowhand crumpled into the dust, his pistol skittering from his hand. Silence fell, broken only by the groans of wounded men dragging themselves away. The survivors turned tail, spurring hard, vanishing into the prairie the way a storm rolls back to horizon. Harlan lowered his gun, chest heaving. Around him, the ranch bore scars. Fences torn, ground bloody, but it still stood. And so did they. Naya stepped closer, rifle lowered, her hand brushing Harlan's arm. For a moment, their eyes met in the smoky dawn. No words passed, but something unshakable bound them there in the blood and dust, a promise, born in violence, that none of them would ever face the world alone again. Chapter 6. The Ranch in New Dawn. The prairie lay quiet after the storm of violence, the kind of quiet that carried both relief and mourning. Smoke drifted from charred wood where bullets had splintered the porch rail. Blood darkened the dust in patches, already drying beneath the harsh sun. Yet the ranch still stood, and so did they. Harlan Cole leaned against the corral post, his arm bandaged roughly with a strip of cloth. The ache in his muscles told him he wasn't as young as the men he'd faced, but there was pride in his weariness. Pride, and something else, something he hadn't felt in years. Belonging. The sisters moved with purpose around him. Tala knelt by a wounded horse, humming softly as she treated its flank. Young Sonny swept shattered glass on the porch, stubbornly refusing to let tears fall. And Naya, tall, unbending, stood near Harlan, scanning the horizon as if daring the world to test him again. When the chores slowed, the silence between them filled with weight. Naya turned to him, her eyes softer now, though no less fierce. "You fought for us," she said quietly. Harlan shifted, his hat brim shadowing his face. "Fought for my land." Naya stepped closer, firelight from the hearth spilling across her skin. "No, you fought for family." Her hand brushed his, firm and certain. "Whether you will admit it or not." The words lodged deep, stirring something buried under years of dust and grief. He looked at her then, really looked. The strength in her shoulders, the pride in her stance, the scars hidden in her gaze that mirrored his own. His throat tightened, but the words, rough and cracked, finally broke free. "I thought my life ended the day I buried her," he admitted, voice low. "But standing here with you, with all of you, it feels like maybe I was wrong." Naya's lips curved, not quite a smile, but something steadier, stronger. "We all lost something," she said, "but together we build again." The youngest sisters came to stand with them then, their faces lit by the rising dawn. Tala placed a hand on Harlan's arm. Sonny leaned against his side, small and unafraid. And for the first time in many long, lonely years, Harlan felt the weight of solitude lift. The sun broke over the prairie, spilling gold across the land. Horses stirred in the corral, the ranch breathing as if alive again. Harlan set his hat back on his head and looked out across the wide horizon. Naya at his side, the sisters close behind. The ranch wasn't just his anymore. It was theirs. And as the coyotes called faintly in the distance and the first warmth of the day touched his skin, Harlan knew. From the ashes of dust and danger, love had returned, steady as the dawn. The sun dipped low, painting the plains in molten gold, the horizon stretching wide and endless as if it held every answer they had searched for. Harlan Cole stood at the fence line, hat in hand, the wind carrying the scent of sagebrush and the faint echo of saloon music drifting from town. Behind him, the ranch was alive again, horses restless in corral, smoke curling from the chimney, laughter of the younger sisters weaving through the air like a promise of tomorrow. Naya walked toward him, her step steady, her shadow long in the fading light. She stopped close, so near he could feel the warmth of her against the cool evening breeze. For a moment they only stood there, the silence heavy, but no longer hollow. "You gave us a home," she said softly, her dark eyes steady on his. "But more than that, you gave us a place in your heart." Harlan's throat tightened. His voice, rough from years of disuse, carried clear in the stillness. "Truth is, you gave me mine back." He reached for her hand, callous fingers finding hers with the gentleness of a man who had finally remembered how to live. The sun sank, casting them both in shadow and flame. She leaned against him, and for the first time since the grave on the hill, he felt whole. "Together," Naya whispered, "we'll make this land more than just dust and sorrow." And as the coyotes sang to the twilight, Harlan pulled her close and answered simply. Words meant to last a lifetime. "Together, we're home."